Hey, Adrie, you want to try this Saigon fruit beer?
A what?
You know, a Saigon apple beer.
No. What are you talking about? What's that?
What? You don't know? They taste so good. There's chili, ginger, and this one's apple. I'm trying to speak more Vietnamese. Try this fermented apple juice.
You're not speaking Vietnamese. You're speaking English. Show me what you're drinking.
Here.
Saigon Cider.
Yeah, that's what I said. Fermented apple juice. If you want to enjoy a Saigon Cider while we're stuck in lockdown, you can still get delivery through Classic Deli or By Nature. Check out the links in the notes.
Hột gà nướng, hột vịt lộn, hột vịt sữa, trứng cút lộn, mất xào đây. Mất xào đây.
Thanks for listening to a Vietnam podcast. This is your host, Neil Mackay. If you're based in Vietnam, you know how much of a problem it can be to find entertainment in English. Adrie and I really struggled with that when we first came here, and that's why I started a Vietnam podcast. 7 Million Bikes not only hosts a Vietnam podcast, but we also host stand-up comedy shows around Saigon, and we've even done some shows in Da Nang and Hoi An. We also host regular quiz nights and events. We do this so that you can have fun, connect with others, and share experiences of Vietnam. Become a member of the 7 Million Bikes community that we're building, and you'll get free tickets to comedy shows, which includes a free beer, access to episodes a day early, credit at the end of each episode for your support and membership, and invites to special 7 Million Bikes member events. Membership starts from only 92,000 dong a month. That's only $4 a month. And if you join the community before the end of August and you live in Vietnam, we'll send you a free 7 Million Bikes face mask. The link to become a member is in the show description below. Thank you so much to everyone who joins. We appreciate it and we're excited to build the community with you. 7 Million Bikes. Listen, laugh, connect. Thank you very much to Brandon Thompson, Zion Johnson and Alistair Chapman who've already joined the community and been supporting for a long time now. We look forward to seeing you guys at a live event soon. While we're on a break between season 6 and 7, check out this episode from March 28th, 2020, how we ended up in a Vietnamese government quarantine camp. Enjoy! Welcome to another episode of 7 Million Bikes, a Saigon podcast. My name's Neil Mackay. I'm your host as always, and this is an extra special episode. For regular listeners, you've noticed that there's not been an episode in a while. I've been really busy, doing lots of comedy nights, among other things. And then obviously, as everyone knows, then the coronavirus struck, and it's kind of put a stop to a lot of things right now, not just in Vietnam and around the world. So this is an extra special episode and it might turn into a special season. We'll see how we go. But this episode is being recorded from quarantine. So my wife right now are currently in quarantine. We have been for 8 days now. We have 6 days left. We have no complaints about that. We expected to be here. The food's awesome. We get fed 3 times a day. We're isolated in our room. We stay away from each other. We're all healthy. We've had a test so far. We're waiting to find out if that's negative, which fingers crossed it will be. But I thought for this episode, I'm going to introduce and I'm going to interview my wife. So here I have Adrie with me, and she's going to tell us basically a bit of the story, and I'm sure I'll chip in as well, of how we ended up in quarantine, because it was quite dramatic living through it, wasn't it?
Hello. Yeah, it was pretty anxiety-inducing, to say the least. Yeah,
so what we're going to share is not really a little bit about what it's like in quarantine, probably will actually, but mostly we're going to just share the kind of like what happened the 10 days or so before we got into quarantine was maybe the most stressful of our life, partly because of the changing situation that was happening every single day around the world and in Vietnam, that ended up landing us in quarantine. So let's go back, right? So tell Adrie, what was our ill-fated plan originally?
Okay, so if we go back before this whole pandemic started, our original planned short story version was we had 3 weddings in 3 different countries. actually on 3 different continents in 3 weeks, 3 Saturdays in a row. So we've known about 2 of the 3 weddings for nearly up to close to a year now. And our plan was to go to New Zealand for 2 weeks, attend wedding number 1, your cousin's wedding, my cousin-in-law, I guess, fly on Monday the 23rd to the US, spend a couple days in LA, go to Texas, attend my cousin's wedding on the 28th, which coincidentally is today. And then after a week in El Paso, we are planning to fly back to Saigon to attend wedding number 3, our friends, which was going to be on April 4th. And those were our grand plans, and unfortunately, they did not go to plan.
So we'll go back to, we were planning to leave on March 9th, March 10th?
March 9th.
March 9th, right, so a Monday night. And you know, so we've posted a story on Reddit, and we've had lots of support on there, but we've also had some criticism from people off of Reddit as well, saying why did we go, basically calling us idiotic, saying that we were selfish and stupid for going. And so if you're listening to this and you're thinking, why the hell did they go? We'll just provide a little bit of a context as to what was happening around the 9th and 10th of March. Just to kind of explain why we still got on that trip. So do you want to explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the first thing I would say is if we had our flights originally booked for the 10th or the 11th even of March, like we absolutely probably wouldn't have gone. Obviously, days and weeks leading up to our departure, I had been following the news really closely, just as everyone else had. Schools here had clearly been closed, and Vietnam was taking it quite seriously. But I don't know, in hindsight, if the seriousness that Vietnam was assessing the pandemic, or at that time it wasn't a pandemic, gave us maybe a false sense of security to travel, because we felt like we were coming from a relatively unaffected place, transiting through Australia, which at the time, on March 9th, had very few cases. And our final destination at the time was New Zealand, which only had 5 cases as well. And so, I mean, as most people would maybe agree with, a lot of the government response to the outbreak affects how it's dealt with in the country. And from our personal perspective, it seemed like the 3 countries that we would be traveling within were relatively attacking the outbreak in a smart way, I guess, the governments were. I think when we left, we were pretty much, maybe when we left, we were 60-40 going to continue on to the US. And pretty much when we touched down in New Zealand, maybe within a day or 2, it was that percentage of going to the US was rapidly shrinking. And within maybe 3 days after arriving in New Zealand, it was pretty much 100% we were going to cancel the second leg of our journey. So that was very clear pretty early on, I think.
And we were given warnings before we left that the borders could be closing. We were warned by some close family that was a possibility. And we saw there were red flags. There was a few things that we were like, are we doing the right thing by going? Like kind of Adrie mentioned, we'd had this trip planned like a year in the making. It was, we hadn't been back to the US for 3 years to see Adrie's family, so that was obviously a big thing. We actually lived in New Zealand, and that's kind of our home country, so we were excited to go back and see friends there and see my cousin get married. So around that time, people were still traveling, you know what I mean? Like for the wedding in New Zealand, there was people still flying in after us. Nothing was shut down, but as Adrie said, things changed pretty rapidly, and then just changed every single day after that. So that was kind of the situation at the time. Now this is where the drama started before we even left. So do you want to talk about my drama just trying to get out the country?
Yeah, I mean, we had a few red flags that, in hindsight, the universe was probably telling us, don't go, don't go, don't go. Unfortunately, we decided to go. But before we even left, we actually had quite a long layover in Sydney, Australia. And when we booked our tickets a couple months back, I knew at the time that we probably needed to get a visa because our layover was longer than 8 hours. But I'd kind of forgotten about it because we were simply transiting through the country. Until a few days before, like literally 2 days before, I was like, oh no, we haven't gotten a visa. So I quickly went online and just checked. And I knew from previous experience, me personally, I've gotten visas for Australia that have come through pretty quickly, like almost instantaneously. So I followed the guidelines on the immigration website. It basically pointed me to a transit visa, which ended up being a really complicated application process, to say the least. I freaked out a bit, sent it to Neil, asked him to fill it out as well. We both submitted the application, and it came back saying 8 to 14 days processing time. And we're like, oh, what have we done? And it's Australia, you're not getting in without a visa. So we thought, well, we might as well just apply for the electronic visa, which would be basically for like a holiday or a tourist visa, essentially. I applied, and sure enough, instantaneously, it came back approved. This is on Saturday. Neil applied, and because he has a different passport to me, or because you have a different passport to me, it wasn't instantaneous. And, you know, holding our breaths from Saturday night, Sunday into Monday, when he was finally able to call the immigration office in Australia. And they said that actually it's a public holiday in Australia, and most of the offices around the country are closed. So
of all the days when I needed my visa to be processed as fast as possible, I called up immigration, and she's like, it's a public holiday in 4 out of 6 states in Australia, so it's probably not going to get done today. And our flight was that night, so...
We'll be right back.
Join pilot and adventurer Fernando Pino as he takes you on journeys to discover exciting destinations across the UK and Europe. You'll fly with him to hidden gems and experience local culture, from bustling streets to serene hideaways and the best places to eat, sleep, and play. Travel Plans is more than a podcast. It's your ticket to exploring the world and its history with a friend. In this episode, we are flying to discover a beachside paradise perfect for the whole family. Discover golden sands, activities galore, and even free childcare so you get your own break too. Why am I still here?
Yeah, so it was highly unlikely that Neil's visa was going to be approved.
At the same time, our dog needed surgery that day.
Oh, yeah, okay. Okay, we're talking about that now.
Well, I'm just saying that was like the added stress, the added pressure was like our dog also needed to go and have surgery and have like a wart removed. So it was just like so stressful trying to figure all that out.
I got hit by a motorbike on Friday. I could barely walk. That was fun. The Friday before we left.
Oh, geez, talk about I forgot all about that. That was so long ago. You can talk about that and we will go on.
We were doing errands around the city on Friday, getting ready to go, because I work on the weekends, and we were driving down Daytam, and I was sitting on the back of Neil's bike, and one of those drivers that you just curse at when you see them driving past you came too close and clipped my foot, and I thought my toe was broken, or half of my foot was broken. Turns out it was just soft tissue damage, but that threw a total spanner in the works. We had to go to the emergency room, basically, at Columbia Medical.
I forgot all about that.
I got to ride a wheelchair for the first time.
Yeah, guy driving down the street like an absolute maniac. No helmet, of course. Tiny little narrow street, part of Daytam. On the wrong side of the road, and then clips Adrie. And I saw it happen. Adrie didn't, because she was looking the other way. I was driving. And I turned around, I thought I was going to see a leg just ripped up and down the leg. So I was thankful to turn around and see it hadn't been, but he'd managed to kind of almost rip her toe off in the process. So that was just the Friday before we left. Saturday was the visa drama. Then our dog needed surgery. So then we go to the airport.
Yeah, so on Monday, we basically were like, well, Monday was really stressful because we could not figure out a way around the visa issue apart from booking 2 completely new flights, which obviously would have been quite costly. And then also because we were aware of the, epidemic and the not border restrictions so much at that point, but we knew that we didn't want to transit. Well, we couldn't transit anywhere in Asia, like just anywhere in Asia. So looking at the flights was quite restrictive. We were somehow still trying to get through Australia because we really wanted to limit where we were traveling at that time. And so anyway, we went to the airport. We tried to check in. I checked in because I was like, well, we might as well go anyway. If one of us is going to have to rebook tickets, one is better than two. And they wouldn't let Neil check in because he didn't have a visa. And Which we expected, yeah, because you absolutely need one if you're transiting Australia more than 8 hours. Take note if you ever have a long layover in the distant future after the pandemic is over.
We thought they might have like a magic number that they could call and somehow get an instantaneous visa, but they did not. So go on.
Yeah, so luckily we had an onward ticket from Sydney to Wellington. And I gave the woman at the check-in counter my e-ticket so she could see that I was continuing on and not staying in Australia. And she checked me in, she gave me my boarding pass, and then my bag tag came back and she said, your bag is checked all the way through to Wellington. And I was like, oh, so I don't actually need to go pick up my bags and recheck them in and go through customs? And she said, no, you don't have to, it's checked, that's fine. I was like, oh, okay. So light bulb went off in my head, and I realized Neil could still get on the flight, but we just needed to get him out of Sydney in under 8 hours because he didn't have a visa. So we ran quickly, sat down, had no phone credit, had to use the spotty airport Wi-Fi, and then it was just frantically flight searching for an realistically affordable, less than what we had previously expected to pay, like $800 or something.
US, yeah.
For a cheaper flight, basically just to get him out so he wouldn't need that visa. And sure enough, we were able to find one that transited through Auckland instead, so Sydney to Auckland, Auckland to Wellington. Called up Air New Zealand, a little bit of time on the phone, and we're able to rebook him on that flight.
Yeah. So this was, and I was able to get on the same flight as Adrie to get out of Saigon. So we haven't even left the country yet, and we were already having so much drama. There's not one point of this was relaxing. And as I mentioned before, our dog, people who follow us on Facebook or see any pictures, or you know that Biscuit has appeared on previous episodes when she's normally snoring in the background. She's just like everything to us. So the fact that we had to leave her with her amazing dog sitter, Danielle, who we were very comfortable leaving her with, that was just the added pressure as well. So, but we finally managed to get it to work. I got out of the country, we got on the flight. Turns out that my flight, because I had a shorter transit than Adrie, I got to Wellington 4 hours before her.
I was still sitting at the terminal, the gate at Sydney Airport when Neil was already having a beer with our friends in New Zealand.
Playing FIFA.
I was so annoyed.
So we got to Wellington fine. So we stayed with our friends, Nora and Cartwright, who were unbelievable. And then from then on, that would be the night of the 10th or the night of the 9th.
We arrived in New Zealand on the 10th. Yeah, the evening of the 10th.
And then, so as I said, we're all going there for my cousin's wedding, so she's obviously Scottish like me. Her now husband is a Kiwi, and they live in Australia, so people are flying over from Australia, people flying over from Scotland, people coming from the US, all coming to New Zealand for their wedding on the 17th. So what happens, was it 17th?
21st.
21st? Oh yeah, sorry, 21st, yeah. Dates don't mean anything to me anymore. On the 21st. So what happened then? How did things start unraveling once we arrived in New Zealand?
Well, I've been like actively reading the news for the last few months, and that didn't change when we got to New Zealand, in large part because things were escalating around the world massively on the 10th, 11th, 12th. I think the 10th, possibly in the US, which it would have come through I think it must have come through on the 11th in New Zealand because of the time difference, but I think the 10th was the day when like March Madness shut down, sports around the world, around the country, were being cancelled in the US. Like, it was really escalating in the US. Obviously, Europe had already started to escalate. Not as much maybe in the UK, but like for me, from looking at it from far away perspective, like shit was getting real. I think the 10th or the 11th was the day that it was declared a pandemic around the world, which was like, crap. And then quickly thereafter, like Tom Hanks was like the first celebrity to be tested positive for COVID, and he was in Australia at the time, and I was like, well, that's really close. I didn't even realize it was much of an issue in Australia. And then, yeah, sure enough, I mean, our first couple of days were a little bit blissful because we were still quite isolated in New Zealand. It still felt safe and normal and comfortable, like things hadn't gotten there. But
in terms of people in New Zealand as well at the time, like it really wasn't, like the difference between when we got to New Zealand and when we left. Now, obviously now the country's, as we speak now, the country's in lockdown. When we were there on the 11th and 12th, which, geez, it's not, how long ago was that? It's like 2 weeks ago. Life in New Zealand was completely normal. No one was really talking much about social distancing.
People didn't know the reaction. Like, obviously, COVID was kind of a new topic of conversation in New Zealand when we were there. And when we told people what we'd been through in Vietnam in terms of, like, schools had been shut for 2 months, or, well, 6 weeks rather, and just how it had already affected a lot of people's livelihood in Vietnam and businesses and children and teachers, people had no idea. They were just completely, like, surprised that we'd been dealing with COVID for 2 months already since the end of Tet. And but that quickly, very, very quickly changed. Like, probably in the first couple of days we were there, it was still kind of like a joke, the way it is most places around the world before it really hits. Like, oh, Corona, haha. Like, still kind of funny. And then literally every single day that kind of changed.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've said this a few times, just when coronavirus kind of first started here and they started shutting the schools, I mean, I was making jokes about it being overreaction. I remember asking a whole audience of 20, 30 people, and does everyone think it's an overreaction? Everyone's like, yeah, it's an overreaction. I'm making jokes about it. Now I absolutely regret that. Don't regret it, but I now don't think it was an overreaction. But so I think the point is that you're making, we'd been living with this, we'd gone through that period of denial of like, this isn't that serious in Vietnam, and we've come through now like, right, okay, this is something to be taken seriously with. But I think definitely in New Zealand and Australia, and we'll talk a bit more about even a couple of weeks later, they still weren't taking it too serious. We kind of started to feel really, really awkward in New Zealand because and again, Adrie was the one doing most of the reading, Facebook groups, news, up to date with everything, that things started to get really awkward for us, right?
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure what you're referring to, but because we'd been dealing with it maybe longer than some other people had in Australia and New Zealand, it seemed like, and we are to the point where we'd taken it very seriously. Even like the way we traveled was different to people who traveled on, say, from like Sydney to Wellington. The difference in passengers from Vietnam to Sydney were like really different. But yeah, I mean, I think the kind of nonchalance, blasé-ness of it in New Zealand, which I can completely understand because, I mean, the 6th case occurred when we were there on like the 15th of March was the 6th confirmed case. So like, people didn't think it was a thing really. And then obviously that quickly escalated. But yeah, I think because we'd been exposed to the news and it'd been quite close and we'd just been in it for so long, the nonchalant attitude of a lot of people that we came in contact with was a little bit unnerving and kind of uncomfortable sometimes when people were just like, I don't think we were social distancing at that point, but I was very hyper aware of like cleaning my hands, sanitizing, not sharing drinks, not touching other people's stuff. And people in New Zealand weren't doing that yet.
Still sharing food and stuff like that a week later. Well, so, and this is how quickly it escalated, right? So my sister flew in from Australia for the wedding. She was a bridesmaid on the 16th, Friday the 16th.
You're the worst dates.
I know.
No, Friday the 13th.
Friday the 13th. She flew in on Friday the 13th. and I won't say what she does, but she's quite high up in Australia in the health community. So she's very aware of what's going on. She sits in high-level meetings. There was no travel restrictions at that point. She'd still flown over for the wedding. She was looking forward to it. She was aware, that there was the things weren't right in the world and there was a looming problem. But at that point, Friday the 13th, she was still flying over from Australia, fully intending to be in New Zealand until after the wedding, which was going to be on the 21st. This is how quickly it escalated. On the 14th, they had the hens party on the Saturday, and my sister got a phone call that night saying that she had to come back to Australia the next day. So she spent about 48 hours in New Zealand before she was told she had to come back again. Because she's high up in the health community, they needed her back. But that's how quickly it escalated, that she was comfortable getting on a plane on the Friday, and by the Sunday she was then having to fly back to Australia. On that same Sunday, we had relatives flew in from the USA just before the restrictions came into place. So then New Zealand put in restrictions that anyone that came in after the 14th had to self-isolate for 14 days. After the 15th. And then a couple of days after that, then the Prime Minister of New Zealand recommended, I think, anyone that had come in after the 8th of March should self-isolate, but it wasn't enforced. I'm getting a doubtful look right now.
I'm not entirely sure about that.
But so the point is, things were changing quickly. So my sister went back. We had another bridesmaid flew in. She came in on the Saturday of the 14th. And again, because the situation was starting to change so rapidly, she decided to fly back on the 16th. So she spent, I think, less than 48 hours in New Zealand.
She'd come all the way from the UK.
She'd come all the way from Scotland and flew all the way back to Scotland. And I think it was that second week where things in New Zealand really started to ramp up. By this point, Adrie was pretty much like not sleeping almost.
I was sleeping, but it was really difficult. I would say that like the only respite I got from following the news and thinking about like what should we do next? Are we doing the right thing? Should we stay? Should we go? Like, should we do this, that, and the other thing? The only respite I got was like when I put my phone down and forced myself to try to go to sleep. But even that, like I would wake up in the middle of the night, check my phone. Because we were dealing with so many different time zones. Obviously, we were in New Zealand, which is, I think, 6 hours ahead of Vietnam. And then, obviously, the US is like
14.
I don't know, like 18 hours behind or something.
Yeah.
But it just meant that at any point of the day, new news was coming out. So, like, because we were 6 hours ahead in Wellington, the morning was quite quiet for us. But then as Vietnam started to wake up and policies started to change and meetings started to happen and things at work started to happen and, rumors started to swirl, we'd get like a whole bunch of messages starting from maybe like noon in New Zealand, and that would carry on like through the evening. So I would wake up in the morning, it would be like, oh, let me read all the news that had happened overnight, and then midday, all the stuff would come through from Vietnam, and then obviously I was trying to keep track of the US. We, as I mentioned before, like we pretty much knew very quickly that we weren't going to go to the US, so I was trying to keep that information a little bit at bay because I was just so overwhelmed with the amount of information that I was trying to process and trying to decide what to do with. I mean, rightly or wrongly, like we had emotions from both sides and family ties on both sides, and like we just had so much stuff to kind of mentally assess, like if we were doing the right thing or not. And it was, so I would say like it was, honestly, that week in New Zealand was, apart from maybe like the first and second day we were there, maybe 3 days, it was like the most anxiety inducing, mentally, physically, maybe not physically, but mentally exhausting and emotionally wrenching days I've had in a very, very, very long time, like distant memory. And it got to the point where it was actually like physically exhausting. The day before we left New Zealand on the 19th, I mean, both you and I started to have like our, okay, we're going to save that for later.
Yeah, too far ahead. Skipping ahead there. Well, I mean, at that point as well, I would wake up after Adrie, she'd be on her phone, and literally every morning I was waking up to like, oh my God, wait till you hear this. Like, I would wake up to bad news every day because Adrie had been reading it all. I mean, and that was even like they had the hens party, we had the bachelor party on the 14th. Woke up in the morning of the 15th. I was with all the guys. Contact Adrie. She's like, you need to contact your sister. I was like, oh my god, what now? Obviously, my sister had to go home. So that was just pretty much the norm. Was like every morning just waking up to like a new reality or a new rules were coming into place. So that was the 16th is Monday the 16th. That's when we changed our flight, right?
Yeah, I mean, like, to be honest, I think we would have changed it sooner, but things were just, we were separated on the Saturday. You had to go to your thing super, super early on Saturday, so all day. And then, of course, the dude's stag do rules were like, cannot communicate with females. So barely was communicating all of Saturday. Sunday, obviously, we woke up to the news that Neil's sister had to leave, so we were kind of dealing with that all day and just making sure she was able to like connect with family for at least a little bit.
Yeah, because I mean, it was just meant to be a relaxing time, right? And then suddenly I'm having to like drive across Wellington, which is like a half-an-hour drive to get from where I was to then take my uncle to meet my sister, and then go and have like a last-minute lunch and try and catch up. Then I haven't seen my sister in like 2 years since the marketing cat. I haven't seen my sister in like 2 years, so I got to see her for maybe a grand total of less than an hour.
More than that, we hung out on Friday.
Yeah, but anyway, not for long. So
yeah, so then on Monday was the first kind of like free day that we had to really like try to think clearly, process all the information, decide what we were going to do and how we were going to do it. So that's when we decided to go to a travel agent to just get like an outside perspective opinion, which maybe, I don't know, was necessarily the right thing to do because they were completely oblivious to like what was happening in Vietnam. But it was just too much for like the two of us to deal with. So we knew first and foremost, we'd already canceled our flights from New Zealand to the US. We tried to change them on that existing airline to reroute it back to Vietnam. And we had maintained the date of the 23rd because that was the day we were going to go to the US. And we thought, well, New Zealand is still quite safe. Vietnam is still quite safe. Things are escalating around the world, but it seems to be okay in these three countries. So we'll change our flights to go back after the wedding. That United is the airline we were on, doesn't really fly in Asia. We weren't able to do that, so we decided to go to the travel agent to see what they could pull up on their systems in terms of basically transiting only through the places we knew were safe to get into Vietnam. Obviously, a lot of Asian countries and transit places had been kind of already omitted. So ultimately, we decided on a flight that transited. I was really hoping to transit only through Australia, but we ended up getting on Singapore Airlines, which transited through Australia and Singapore. And we booked that on the Monday.
And that's right. And that at that point, the rules about what, like, obviously you couldn't come from Italy, Korea, I don't know about Korea, but Italy,
Korea.
Iran, UK.
We couldn't transit through Korea, Japan.
Yeah, so at that point we booked those flights going through Singapore, and that was on the Monday, so just to highlight how rapidly things were changing, and that was fine on the Monday. And we booked that for the next, so the wedding was on the Saturday. We're like, we'll do the wedding, which we planned for a year, and then we'll get out of here on Monday morning, we'll get back to Vietnam. And at that point, that was fine.
It was, but I do remember explicitly asking the woman at the agency, I said, if the airline cancels the flights on us, will they put us on another flight? The answer was yes. What are the change fees and restrictions to the airfare that we're booking? Because we know that everything is changing rapidly. So even though we booked for the 23rd, we knew at that point that there was a possibility that we wouldn't be flying on that date on that flight. Whether it was going to be after or before, we weren't sure. But like, I was well aware of the fact that like we were kind of just booking a ticket as a placeholder. So we had a ticket out of the country. At least we're on a flight out of the country, and we knew that was subject to change because everything was changing so quickly. And had we not had a wedding to attend, a family member's wedding to attend, we probably would have gotten out of there pretty quickly, I imagine.
So then that brings us to the Tuesday. I remember Tuesday night, we caught up with some friends, and by this point it was starting to be taken more seriously. Tuesday was St. Paddy's Day, and St. Paddy's Day goes off in Wellington, like that's a big deal. I know, as everywhere is. But so on the Monday though, even though maybe other St. Patrick's Day celebrations around the world were being cancelled, this is how far removed New Zealand was. In Wellington on Monday, everything was still go. All our friends were going out. Everyone was making plans to meet up. And literally by Tuesday, like, people were like, yeah, no, I'm not going out anymore. Like, people were meant to be meeting, were texting saying, no, we're not, everyone's staying home now. Like, this is just, again, the speed of which everything changed. So we did go and meet with some friends, and we did do an elbow bump, I remember, instead of a hug. I hadn't seen one of our friends in 4 years and gave them an elbow bump. So we were starting to become more aware. We were all getting quite worried at that point. We were, like I said, but I still regret. Looking back in hindsight, I wish we'd just gotten out of there. But we did go out, which I regret now as well. But thankfully, don't think we spread the disease. It doesn't look like. But that was starting to become a concern as well, especially reading more and more about how people could be asymptomatic and then spread the disease. So that was starting to become more of a concern. I remember we went to an Irish bar, of course, and met our friend that we were staying with. And I remember going to the bathroom, and just every time I went to the bathroom, just religiously washing my hands, and then just watching all these guys just come in, do their business and leave, and just being like, oh no, like, this is just not a good situation. Like, people aren't getting it here. Like, if we're not social distancing, at the very least, bloody wash your hands properly. So that was a Tuesday night.
I think social distancing at that point in time was still really, really new there.
I don't think that
it was literally like that day, or maybe the day before, that it was kind of like people were starting to be like, oh, okay, yeah, we should keep our distance from each other. And I mean, I can't really remember now because everything has changed. My brain has turned to mush, but I don't think we really knew the whole asymptomatic thing, or it wasn't as widely known until...
Yeah, because it was always like, have you got a fever? Have you got a fever?
Yeah,
have you got a
because
fever? Do you have chills?
So much was like, unless you have symptoms, blah, blah, blah. I think that asymptomatic thing has come out relatively recently in the last few weeks. Because, I don't know, it just...
More so, anyway.
More so, but also like because it's been spread around Europe, and there's a lot more like Western countries and English-speaking news about the actual symptoms and how it happens and the spread of the disease and stuff. I just don't think it was as wide known then, because, yeah. Anyway.
Well, even today, it's 28th of March right now, I'm just reading Boris Johnson's got coronavirus. They're not testing people he's come into contact with. This is in the Guardian newspaper, and their reason is because they don't have symptoms yet.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wait, hold on a minute. We're learning more and more that, and especially in Vietnam, most of the new cases you're reading aren't people with symptoms, they're asymptomatic.
Yeah.
So I have no idea why they would not be testing people that Boris Johnson has come into contact with, because having symptoms is not like...
Well, again, I think maybe that's still quite a new thing, though, like new-ish thing in the Western world, because I think before it was like, this is the incubation period, but I think all the, like, they were saying, like, probably at some point you will show symptoms, whether it's 2 days or 12 days. But now I think what they're saying is people are getting it with either no symptoms at all, ever, or very, very, very few symptoms. And that's the scary thing. And I don't think that was as wide known 2.5 weeks ago when we were necessarily deciding to travel or not. Which, obviously, as it started to come out, probably when we were in New Zealand, it was terrifying to think, yeah, you could be just a carrier and be completely asymptomatic.
Yeah, I remember being terrified. It was like, it could just have been spreading this around everywhere. So that was Tuesday 17th. And then this is where things really started to ramp up and take a massive dramatic turn. So I wake up Wednesday morning.
No, I told you on Tuesday night.
Okay.
I remember Neil was playing FIFA or something.
Probably.
with our friend, and I was locked in the room frantically reading the news, of course, like quite late on Tuesday evening. And then I came in the room and I was like, Neil, I have to tell you this now. And then he was like, right, okay, I guess I'm going to bed. And I said, we have to wake up. So we were supposed to go on a wine tour with our friends and family, with our family, the wedding party, on the Wednesday. We'd really been looking forward to that. And I said, we cannot go on the wine tour. They were picking us up at like 8, 9 in the morning. And I said, we can't go tomorrow. We have to get out of here now. So I looked at flights. I thought we could maybe try to go on a flight on Wednesday, the 18th in the afternoon. But yes, we woke up the next. So I told him that. I was like, well, there's nothing we can do now. It's like beyond midnight or something. So we woke up the next morning and we went straight to the travel agent and spent 3 or 4 hours there.
So I remember we woke up and then I had to tell the wedding party we weren't coming. And again, I just don't think people realise this. I think got the feeling that people didn't really understand why we were like leaving. So what was on Wednesday morning, at that point our flight was on the Monday after the wedding. But at this point then Adrie had kind of made the informed decision and obviously told me and I agreed. She's like, we need to get out of here now. So at this point we're like, okay, we'll just kind of miss the wedding. We're going to eat the cost of the flight if we have to. Like, this is too dangerous now because what was happening was the news from Vietnam was changing like every day. So now at this point they eliminated ASEAN countries. You couldn't transit through ASEAN countries.
Which we had been traveling through Singapore.
So at that point we were going through Singapore. So that eliminated a lot of options to get back. We could only go through Australia. And even then, it was just every day was tightening the conditions that you could get back to Vietnam. So for anyone that doesn't know us, we've lived here for 4 years. We have valid work permits. Our life is in Vietnam. So at that point, we were still allowed back into Vietnam. But
it was a little bit uncertain, though, because by the time we were going to fly, I mean, I think probably that day, that week anyway, I know that there were just rumors and stuff and people who had... So the thing that was scariest for us at that time was seeing the rumors on Facebook or like the people, maybe not necessarily rumors, actual people's experiences. I was following a lot of groups and comments on Facebook, which, yeah, you can say like fake news or whatever and don't trust anything you see on Facebook. But actually the people that were having real experiences coming into Vietnam from different places were probably the most helpful and illuminating for us in terms of decision making because Neil and I are clearly on different passports, me being from the US and him being from the UK. And so I was actually really scared that his British passport wouldn't allow him to come into the country because we had heard rumors and seen comments about some people with UK passports who had not been to the UK or been to Europe were being denied entry simply on account of the fact that they had a passport from an affected country. And that was quite terrifying. Obviously, as the cases in the US kept going up, I thought that my passport could be in that situation as well. And so we really had no idea what we were going to deal with trying to come into immigration. And then it started to get worse. Like, are we even going to be allowed on the plane? Are they going to allow us to check us in? To make matters worse, I don't have a TRC at the moment. I have just a work visa, and then Neil has a TRC. So we also didn't know if our work visa TRC situation was going to be looked at differently or the same, or like what if we got there and they allowed one of us on and not the other one, or what if we got here and they allowed one of us to go home and one of us into quarantine. So we had so many different factors we were dealing with.
TRC is a temporary resident card, which
I feel like everyone knows what that is now. Maybe not.
Well, yeah, 7 million bikes has listeners all over the world. You don't know what TRC is. Which I'm not really sure what's the difference between a TRC and a work permit here. I have a card in my passport that says I'm a temporary resident.
Well, I had a TRC, but it expired, and then the renewal was just the visa. So I don't know.
So we woke up Wednesday morning, went to the flight centre in Wellington at 9 a.m. Same girl we spoke to, Emlyn, which she's never going to hear this, but Emlyn was amazing. And sadly, we've now found out she's lost her job as part of many people around the world losing their job, because we sent an email to say thank you for all the help just a couple of days ago, and I got an email back saying that she no longer works there. But they do want to hire her back, it said, in a couple of months once this blows over, so hopefully she'll get her job back as well. So Emlyn was amazing. There was Rosie at the flight centre, they were amazing. They gave us some options, and we had to go for a walk because our head was like so just foggy with so much information. Adrie's read so much. All the travel agents follow this website that we were also following called IATA Flight Center, Travel Center, IATATravelCenter.com.
Probably just Google
IATA. Yeah, IATA. But the thing was that's meant to be kind of like the gold standard of information. It gets updated for every country in the world as to their restrictions or whatnot for getting in. But this was where it was getting really muddy, because the information that was on this website, which was apparently the gold standard, was the different information from what was coming out of Vietnam, what we were reading on Facebook, as like the reality, because we were reading like people's real stories about getting through immigration, and their stories didn't match up with the rules and blah blah blah. So real. I mean, by this point things were getting pretty horrible for us. So we it took us from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. to finally rebook our flights. We just cancelled the ones that we had on Monday that were going to go through Singapore. We get credit for them, but that money could be lost, you don't know. So that's just sitting there. We have flight credits all over the world right now. We rebooked our flights for the Friday, so we couldn't get on that flight that afternoon on the Wednesday.
The other thing is there's like 2 or 3 airlines that fly direct from Australia to Vietnam without transiting either through Singapore or Hong Kong or whatever. It's Vietnam Airlines and I think Jetstar, like Qantas Jetstar, whatever. So, and most of those, I don't know if this is always or just at this time, but most of those flights only fly like every other day. And of course, they fly on the same day. So Wednesday, when we got there, we weren't able to get on either a Vietnam Airlines or a Jetstar flight. So we had to wait until the Friday because there were no flights that were flying on the Thursday. So despite like wanting to leave then, there, and now, we had to, the only thing we could book that wasn't transiting through a potential other like problem country was on the Friday.
At 6 a.m. And that was and that was 24 hours before the wedding. So obviously that the wedding kind of became, unfortunately, less of a priority, and the biggest priority became coming back home. But still, though, pretty gutting to the money. To be honest, like we're not rich, but the money was probably the least factor in it. It was still like pretty crap to have spent so much money. We, you know, like any wedding, I'd got a suit made. Adrie'd got a beautiful dress. We'd been out to get like ties and stuff like this. You know, we're ready for a wedding, and weddings aren't cheap, right? And also, again, forgetting about the money, we've been planning for this for a year to see my cousin get married. Our families, well, my family's there, who are now Adrie's family. She knows them all well. It was going to be in this beautiful place in New Zealand. And so the fact that we got so close to the wedding but just had to say we couldn't go was obviously really upsetting as well. So that was a Wednesday. Wednesday afternoon, we ended up meeting up with the family after they'd done the wine tour, and again they just didn't seem to get it. We were like, all right, we're going back to Vietnam, and they're like, okay. Like, they just didn't really seem to understand. Nobody understood the seriousness of the situation. So as I said, some family members had just flown in on the 14th from the USA. There was full plans going ahead for the wedding. There was no talk then about, like, New Zealand is now in lockdown, but there was no talk then of lockdown. There was no talk of, like, now I think all weddings are cancelled in New Zealand, right?
They'd have to be. Yeah, I think at that point they were starting to cancel and advise against events of 500 or more people.
Yeah, 500
there were only about 60 people going to the wedding, and I don't think it might have been like either just before or just after or right around the same time where they started to say like events no bigger than 50 people. So the wedding was never really that in danger of like officially being told it couldn't occur. And yeah.
So then what did we do on the Thursday? Alright, so Thursday we started packing, I guess, because we had to...
I don't remember.
What did we do Thursday
morning? Okay, yeah, so Thursday... okay, so if we just backtrack a little bit. So part of the reason as well that we, like, decided we needed to immediately get back was because when they announced that you couldn't transit through an Asian country, they also said if you do transit through an Asian country as a work visa holder or a resident or a citizen or whatever, you must go into mandatory 14-day government quarantine. So I thought if there's any chance that we won't get put into quarantine, let's go and try to make get, because obviously like we were planning to self-isolate regardless when we came home. But if we thought if we could self-isolate in our apartment with our dog for 2 weeks, that is way more preferable to being in a dorm room without our dog for 2 weeks, like 20 kilometers up the road from our apartment. So that was part of the like impetus to like get out of there as soon as we could. So then when we booked the flight for Friday, Thursday, we were like, okay, so here's what's going to happen. We're going to get, and obviously I'm still reading the news. Things are still changing. There's still all these different accounts of what's happening and where people are going and blah, blah, blah. To this point, Australia and New Zealand still nowhere on Vietnam's radar in terms of like quarantine or anything like that. So, which is why we were planning to just self-isolate. But Thursday we were like, okay, realistically, the things that are going to happen, and so we were talking through what could possibly happen. One, best case scenario, we fly, no problems. They welcome us back. We go home. We self-isolate for 2 weeks. Next scenario, we fly, we get there. They put us into government quarantine. Next scenario, we get to the airport. They don't let us on the plane for whatever reason because the rules have changed and they've been posted on the IATA website. Next scenario, we fly to Australia, somehow in transit, borders shut, and we get stuck in Australia. Next scenario, we cancel our flight and we just stay here.
Here being New Zealand.
Here being New Zealand until this all blows over, which was a realistic possibility because things were changing so quickly and we didn't know. So Thursday we were just talking through all these possible scenarios and what we would do if we got put in any one of the situations.
I was going to say the worst case scenario was that somehow we got turned away at the border, and because we have different passports, we would be sent back to our home countries, which I've not lived in the UK for 15 years or longer. My family's there. Adrie's not lived in the US for like 9 years now.
9 years.
So like, and obviously we're married and we don't want to be apart. So that was like literally we've going through every one of these scenarios. Like, what if we get sent back to our home countries, then the borders shut down and we're separated for 4, 5, 6 months? Like that was the worst of the worst case scenarios. But so do you remember?
Yeah.
Well, we woke up on Thursday morning at our cousin's house.
Oh, that's right.
I just remembered. So Wednesday night we hung out with the family. We stayed with them. We woke up Thursday morning, and again, this is what I'm saying, every morning we woke up and something had changed. So we woke up Thursday morning, and suddenly the new rules were that to get back into Vietnam, you needed a negative COVID test. And we were just like, what? Like, oh, you got to be kidding me on. So this was the new rules that had just been posted. So I called up the Vietnamese embassy in Wellington. I spoke to the guy there. They were super quick to respond, like picked up the phone right away. But I said to them, like, I'm traveling.
Super uninformed.
Well, they were super uninformed. I told them they were flying on I was on a UK. He said, what passport are you on? I said, UK. But no, you can't get in. I was like, what do you mean? That's not the rules. Don't say I can't get in because I'm on a UK passport. He's like, no, you can't get in. I'm like, no, I've not been to the UK in years. Okay, cool. And then I said, my wife's on a US passport. No, she can't get in either. I was like, all right, this is not the rules that I'm reading. Can you double check? He's like, okay, call me back in 15 minutes. That's how good they were. Call back in 15 minutes, ask for Tong directly. He came back, sorry, I got that wrong. Yeah, you can get in, but you need a COVID test. And I'm like, okay. So then we get dropped off at the travel doctor in Wellington, where we went 4 years ago to get all of our vaccinations when we started traveling. Still had our records on file. Got to see a doctor right away. Now, you cannot get a COVID test in Australia or New Zealand, and I don't know about the rest of the world.
Most of the
Western world, right? Unless you have symptoms, they will not give you a COVID test. So we went to the doctor. She gave us an examination, obviously tested our temperature, looked in our throats, everything. And she gave us a clean bill of health saying, like almost verbatim, that this patient is asymptomatic, therefore I cannot give him a COVID test, but he seems healthy, basically. She signed it. We made sure she stamped it, because anyone listening who lives in Vietnam knows Vietnam loves the stamp. So we made sure it had an official stamp on it. That was the best thing we could get. So again, this is just how everything's changing. We wake up Thursday morning, suddenly you need a COVID test. Suddenly we need to take 2 hours to go and get this, more expenditure.
The other thing is, if we did get a COVID test and we waited for the 2 days to get our results, we wouldn't have come back. Like, we couldn't get back.
Yeah.
Like, we just wouldn't have been able to come back. Like, we knew that things were changing so quickly. If we were like, oh, we'll just get the COVID test if we could, wait for 2 days and then we'll fly on Sunday. Like, we literally wouldn't have been allowed back in the country because by that point they'd closed the borders to all foreigners. So we couldn't take the risk of not trying to get on our flight on the Friday.
And the other thing was they said that you need a COVID test that had been approved by the relevant authorities, but no one could tell you what that meant, like approved by the relevant authorities. So we then took a letter of clear bill of health we actually walked, because Wellington, anyone knows Wellington is so small, we took a 15-minute walk and got to the Vietnamese embassy in Wellington, just walked right in, rang the doorbell. We're like, can you translate this for us? Can you stamp this? Can you do something? And again, super helpful, but couldn't actually help. But they were like, no, there's nothing we can do. So that was Thursday. By this point now, early afternoon, our flight's at 6 a.m. We couldn't really do much more at this point. It's like, all right, we're just going to have to just get on the flight. So we went for a walk. If anyone knows Wellington, it's just the most stunning place on earth on a good day. We took a beautiful walk in the hills. We enjoyed the scenery. We managed to breathe. But I mean, again, just the whole time, just anxiety the whole time. We know what's coming. Yeah, Adrie wants to say something.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think we were just at a loss for what to do. But I knew, well, one of the things I had really wanted to do and prioritize on our trip away from Vietnam before this all massively changed was just take advantage of the ability to walk out and go for a hike, go in nature, like fresh air, hills, greenery, etc. And so I thought, well, this is our last opportunity. We might be stuck in a room for 2 weeks when we get back. And also Vietnam's not, Ho Chi Minh City, there's not that many places to walk anyway. So we went for a walk. And we were like, we'll go for a walk and then we'll go to the grocery store because we want to pick up some like last minute New Zealand treats and things we missed and to bring back. So as we were going to the grocery store, I had a stroke of genius, not really, but I was like, I should message, because we knew someone in quarantine here, been following her stories on Instagram. She'd been in quarantine for a couple of days. So I thought, I'll message her and say, like, if you knew you were going to be sent to quarantine, what would you bring? Because we were going to go to the grocery store, and I thought, well, if we might go to quarantine, at least let's be prepared. And literally, I was about to send that message, or maybe I did press send, when...
So I'd been in communication with my work with the HR director, and I maybe don't get his title wrong, but for want of a better word, he's the immigration manager, so he deals with all visas, everything to do with all the expats that work at our company. And so he was messaging with like a group chat, and they were kind of giving advice on what to do to get back in. But they were kind of reiterating the fact that you need this COVID test, and we're like, but we cannot get the COVID test, like we just can't. So they were doing the best they could. It was frantic on their end, and again waiting on time difference. So like Vietnam didn't wake up till about like 1. Well, like people weren't coming to work until about 1 or 2 in the afternoon in New Zealand time. So we're having to wait all morning for people to wake up here to communicate. So we're chatting, and then he drops a bombshell that he's just been told that at midnight that night the borders were closing to everyone but Vietnamese nationals.
Mm-hmm.
So that like
midnight on the 20th, and we are flying on the 20th.
No, like the stroke of midnight
yeah.
on the, so like the morning,
yeah.
It was a bit confusing because, with midnight and you can get confused. Like as the clock struck midnight on the morning of the 20th or the night of the 19th, the border would close to everyone but Vietnamese nationals and citizens. And so that, like, our world just, at that point, after everything we'd been through, our world then just turned upside down even more, because we are like, what does that mean? And he's like, the borders aren't going to reopen for at least 30 days. And we're like, what? So so we're going to be here in New Zealand for 30 days at least. And that was the situation at about 4 o'clock on the Thursday. 3-4 o'clock, I think.
Yeah, maybe 3 o'clock, because we were about to go. Yeah, it was like late afternoon. And to be fair, like, I mean, if we're going to get stuck anywhere in the world, New Zealand would be the place, because we're both residents there and we have friends there, and it's comfortable and safe, and we know Wellington, and it's one of our favorite places in the world. But being told that you can't come home was just like a punch in the chest or the stomach. It was horrible. It was just absolutely horrible. So our grocery store trip was pretty crap.
We only bought like 2 things and left. We
had
were
no idea
preparing
what
to
to
buy
do.
stuff for quarantine because we were fully expecting to be quarantined. So we're like, right, let's get some protein bars, let's get some snacks, let's, because we followed. So the person we were talking to was Frances, who's the blogger. You might have checked out her blog, So the Adventure Begins. Go check it out if you haven't. She's awesome. She's actually, me and her have recorded an episode before the pandemic, before we left, and she's going to be the first episode of the next season of 7 Million Bikes. So we won't be talking about this, but maybe we'll do a follow-up interview to find out her experience. But so we've been talking to her, we'd started getting supplies, and then all of a sudden it was like, you're staying in New Zealand. And that was, we thought that was, the door was closed at that point, right?
Yeah, we were just waiting for an imminent government release. But then, obviously, having experience with like the school closure government releases and all the different releases, like when you hear kind of rumors of what's going to happen, actually sometimes it can take a bit longer. So we just kind of were waiting for it, and it just never was coming through. So we thought, well, obviously those scenarios that I played out before were still all possible, still all relevant. Some at this point more than others. To make matters more interesting, I'd been checking all of our documentation and getting all of our boarding passes and proof that we'd been in New Zealand just in case they asked us at immigration, blah, blah, blah. And I looked at the printout from Flight Center from where we'd gotten our tickets booked.
Forgot about this as well.
And they'd completely forgotten I have a double-barreled last name, and they'd forgotten the Mackay part of my last name on my official ticket. So we called Flight Center up, and they said, basically, long story short, after calling them back and blah, 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 they said, you have 2 options. We can cancel your ticket altogether, basically like you're not going, or we're going to have to rebook you a ticket, because they had to call Qantas to change it, and they were on hold for like 3 hours. Thank God we didn't have to do that. But they were like, we can't change the name. We have to either cancel your ticket and rebook you a new one at Flight Center's expense, or just basically cancel your ticket. So something that we never would have even considered, basically like canceling our ticket altogether, was now on the table, because we're like, well, what if we're stuck here? Should we just cancel it? Should we not even go? Should we even bother? And I was like, this never would have even been a consideration if Flight Center had put my name into the system correctly. So that was a whole nother consideration we had. Luckily, at the end of the day, literally at like 7 p.m., they were calling us back, and they're like, we're closed already. What are you doing tomorrow? And I was like, just keep the ticket, book the ticket, we're going.
But this just to try and explain, this is how stressful the situation was. It had gone from day by day to hour by hour. At this point, it was minute by minute. It was literally like our friends had come home from work. We explained the situation to them. The 2 of us are a mess. Adrie was having like a panic attack. We were both pretty much in tears, because we thought we were going to have to stay for 30 days. We don't have jobs in New Zealand. We can work there, but we don't have jobs. We don't have a home. We've got people we can stay with, but we didn't want to be a burden on people. But so at this point, we're explaining to our friends, Nora and Cartwright, we've told them a million times, they were just unbelievable. They're like, look, if you need to, you can stay. You've got a home here. It's fine. Don't stress. Just do what you need to do. And so we are just weighing up everything. And then, like Adrie said, then we've got Flight Center emailing and calling, being like, yeah, we're closing. What are we doing with this ticket? And I'm like speaking to her on the phone, be like, just give me 5 more minutes. Then I'm having to put the phone down. Then me and Adrie are like, what are we doing? Are we cancelling this flight? Are we getting on it? Like,
yeah, one other thing that was added to I don't think we've mentioned this yet. So backtrack to the scenarios that I said before. One of the scenarios was we get on the flight to Australia. We had a long layover in Australia, so we knew that like a lot could change in that time. If they weren't going to let us on the plane in Australia to Vietnam, we'd have to turn around and come back to New Zealand, which at that point was still a possibility, even though New Zealand had already closed its borders. Because we're residents, we could actually still come back to New Zealand. Thank God that was a possible option. However, by this point, they'd already implemented the 14-day mandatory self-isolation for anyone traveling from overseas. So we had to weigh up the realistic possibility of getting on a flight to Australia, possibly turning back around to come into New Zealand, and then going into self-isolation in a country where we don't have a residence. Like, we are residents, but we don't have a residence. So that was scary, because at this point, like, where we had been staying, we knew, like, they have a nice, lovely house, but they only have one bathroom, not enough for 4 people when 2 people need to be in isolation. So we were going to have to find another place to stay. And at this point, like, you don't want to ask someone like, oh, we might have to self-isolate in case we've picked something up traveling to Australia. Can we stay in your house? So that was like something we had to consider. Like, do we even get on the plane at the risk that we are sent back and then we have to self-isolate in New Zealand?
Because, I mean, and Nora and Cartwright were amazing. They were just super honest. They were like, if you get sent back and you have to self-isolate, you can't stay here because they have jobs and then we'd be putting them at risk and things like that. So, again, thankfully, a friend, Yvonne, who we'd met a few days before to catch up, she, again, her and her husband, Andrew, just unbelievable. Like, from the beginning, they were like, if you need somewhere to stay, like, you can come here. So, again, I had to message them and be like, this is the scenario. If we get sent back, can we come and stay with you for 14 days and self-isolate? And again, people were just so unbelievable. She was like, yep, we got a big house, that's fine, don't worry, do what you need to do. Go. So that was like a bit of a peace of mind that, you know, if we were sent back to New Zealand, we had somewhere to go, but it's still not a nice feeling to know that you are basically being a burden on someone, right? So this was minute by minute. We're now getting up to, I think, about 7 o'clock on the Thursday. There's still no announcement from the Vietnamese government that the borders were shutting it at midnight that night. So we just kind of went, right, let's just go to the airport. So then we made the decision, right, let's go to the airport tomorrow morning, 4 a.m., 3 a.m., because the flight was at 6. We'll ask them what we need to do. If they say the borders are closed or they're going to close, well then, right, fine, we turn back. We're going to be in New Zealand for at least 30 days. We'll deal with it, right? We've got somewhere we can stay. We'll just have to figure it out. The next scenario is we get on the flight from Wellington to Sydney, then the borders close once we arrive in Sydney, and then suddenly we have to go back to New Zealand. So all those scenarios then come back into play. So we get to the airport. Everyone had the same idea to get there early, I think. There was a whole bunch of people there before any staff were there. The staff come out looking terrified that they have to come out to, like, you know, deal with this. Again, they're probably all going to lose their job, so absolute, like, sympathy for what they have to deal with. I'm sure they're like, I've got to deal with this shit and then I'm going to lose my job the next day. But they really were clueless. Like, that was the most disappointing thing. Like, we knew more than the airport staff, and like, I get that they're probably grumpy or whatever because they're losing their jobs. But when we asked the woman, like, what's happening, she was like, I don't know. Do you know what's happening?
Oh, I mean, the worst thing was just that because we are obviously not Vietnamese, and we told her that our final destination was Vietnam. It was immediate judgment on her face, and she was like, well, that's what you get if you choose to travel right now. And we had to say, like, look, like, we're trying to get home. Like, our home is in Vietnam. Like, obviously we didn't tell her our life story, but she immediately changed. Her expression changed as soon as she knew that we were not just, like, trying to go on a backpacking trip to Vietnam at this point in time. But, I mean, yeah, it wasn't fun, and it was confronting, and obviously just traveling at that point in time because things had changed so quickly was just not comfortable at all.
And so this now is when there was a stark difference between the Australian and New Zealand attitude and the rest of the world. So airport in New Zealand that morning, nobody wearing masks. Nobody looked like anything different was happening at all. The world seemed normal. So we managed to check in. There was a few red flags. First of all, they weren't checking anyone in who didn't have an Australian passport. Now, hold on, someone's at the door here in quarantine. We're just going to take a break for a quick second. It's probably a temperature check. All right, and we're back. They were just delivering some water. We'll talk more later on about how amazing the staff and everyone here at quarantine, but right now we'll focus on the story. So, the first red flag was they were only checking in Australian passports, so that was a worry. Then when we asked could they check our bag all the way to Saigon, they said no, they could only check it to Sydney. So that was again a worry because we were worried that we were going to get stranded in Sydney. But we got on the plane, and it was really, really worrying because nobody took our temperature. Nobody asked us to fill in any health declaration form. Nobody asked us about anything. Nobody said anything about visas. They literally just boarded us on the flight as if nothing was different. Then we got to Sydney, same thing. No health checks, no declaration forms, no temperature checks.
Even the announcements on the airplane, like, for the people that were landing in Sydney were, like, so
normal,
relaxed. They were like, according to the Australian government, if you're landing in Australia, you need to self-isolate for 14 days. have a great time in Sydney.
Yeah.
It was like, it was just so conflicting, and it just didn't sound serious.
Yeah.
Like, which you can kind of understand if you just got off the plane. Why? I mean, yeah, they handed out information, I think, but the announcements on the airplane were just like
Life is not
laughable.
Yeah. So we got to Sydney. The first thing we did was we bought gloves. We found a chemist. We bought gloves. We already had masks that we brought with us. So we were in Sydney airport. We were about the only people with masks and gloves on. And I took a selfie or a picture and sent it to, I can't remember, a couple of family members, a couple of friends. And one of them noticed, they were like, why are you the only people in masks and gloves? Like, and they could see in the background that no one else was. And by this point, we were super paranoid. We were super worried that we had the disease, that we were asymptomatic. We were super worried that we were spreading it.
Could pick it up anywhere.
Or we could pick it up. We were absolutely terrified to the pit of our stomach that we could have the disease and then spread it. Like, it was horrible, horrible feeling. Or that we could pick it up anywhere, because it seemed like a lot of the cases were coming from airports. So what we ended up doing was, and to Adrie's credit, we basically just found like a little corner where we could plug our phones in. There was a couple of seats. We sanitized it ourselves. We washed it down. We didn't see any cleaners anywhere washing anything in the airport. So we sanitized it ourselves, put our gloves on, and we just stayed there. We had an 8-hour layover again, and we just stayed in this little corner that we'd self-quarantined ourselves, or whatever you want to say. Like, cleaned it all down. We went for a couple of walks. We didn't go near anyone. And so eventually, after however long, 6 hours, we were able to then check in. The check-in opened for our next flight. And again, thankfully, we could check in. There was a lovely girl there from Jetstar. I got talking to her. I said, how are you doing? She's like, yeah, no, I've lost my job. I'm like, oh my God. She's like, yeah, I'm going to be let off for 3 months, no pay. So absolutely lovely with me. But again, this is the reality of the situation. You're like, geez, these people are losing their jobs, you know what I mean? So, but she got us checked in. I explained our situation to her again. Not that she was clueless, but she read the restrictions online that were available at that time. She's like, yeah, you got a work visa? Yep, you got this, you got that. Yeah, you should be okay. Don't worry, you should be okay. So at this point, we started to kind of breathe a little bit, right? We're like, right, we booked on the flight to Saigon. And there was like a tiny percent of me was like thinking that maybe we would get home because we had this health certificate form, because we had a work visa. I was like, maybe they'll let us go home and we'll just self-isolate at home.
You got my hopes up.
I know, but it was only like a little bit better. So we got on the flight. Oh, and at this point as well, I took another selfie. At the check-in gate for the flight to Saigon, it was like a different world. Every single person in the background had a mask on. Most people had gloves on. Like, everyone, you could just see the difference between the people flying to Vietnam versus the people who were just going about their life in Australia. So we got on the flight, we sanitized our chair, our screen, our table, which apparently you should probably do that anyway on every flight, but we cleaned everything down before we touched anything. We kept our masks on, we kept our gloves on for pretty much the duration of the flight. If you can hear in the background, there's a plane going overhead, so there are still planes landing or taking off, I'm not sure which one it is. Flying, still planes flying. But anyway, so we got back to Saigon. Now, it still gets more dramatic.
It's going to be the longest episode ever.
It doesn't matter. Let's go. You tell what happened next.
Okay, so yeah, despite... so we thought Friday was going to be like super, super stressful. And apart from like trying to be hyper vigilant about cleanliness and sanitization, is that a word? Sanitization.
Sanitization.
And not spreading and not picking up anything, it was relatively smooth sailing. Like, there were no issues. And we got into Vietnam and the plane landed and it was the longest line ever apart from that. So there was like the health declaration that you had to fill out. We couldn't fill that out until we got to Sydney because you need to put your your seat number in. So we filled that out before we got on the plane. And then we landed, we had, our little QR code up. We were ready to go through the health declaration line. It was quite long. We didn't see any other foreigners in sight. We're in the very back of the airplane, so to us it just seemed like it was mostly Vietnamese citizens and residents returning home.
I think mostly students, right? Like overseas Vietnamese students returning home. Younger
people. So we got in the line, we waited. We finally got up to the front, and as soon as they saw our passports, they didn't even look at our QR codes or our health declaration. They just basically sent us away. Somewhere. We didn't really know where. They just said over there. Turns out over there is kind of, if you've ever gotten a visa on arrival at the Tanzania airport, that's basically where over there was. So we get there, and the rest of the foreigners that clearly must have been on our flight were sitting there as well. There was probably between like 10 and 12 other Western people, or non-Vietnamese people, or non-residents, I guess. Some people were of Vietnamese descent. And there wasn't really a lot of like, we didn't really know what was going on in typical fashion, I suppose, with the language barrier and a lot of people kind of just like walking around and stuff. So they took our passports, they took our like health declaration. Not our health declaration. At this point, it was just I gave them the letter that we had gotten in Wellington, our health check. So we gave them that along with our passports, along with our boarding passes, and they kind of just went away.
Mm-hmm. I was going to add, just picture at this point, it is literally looks like something out of a movie. There's people in blue suits everywhere, goggles, masks, gloves. I mean, the only people who are not dressed like that were the passengers off the plane. There was panicked people everywhere. There's screening set up. Like it was literally like a movie, right?
I wouldn't say there was much panic.
I saw a few Westerners that looked pretty panicked.
Maybe just, like, I think for the Vietnamese people, as long as they filled out the health declaration, it was pretty much like not that different, because from our flight coming from Australia, those people were pretty much, health declaration was fine and they got waved through to the immigration line, no problem. There were a few people sitting about. It wasn't as crazy as maybe some of the stuff that happened the previous week when they were health checking and testing everyone that came in, and there were people waiting in the airport and stuff. It wasn't like that for us. We landed about 9:30 and then p.m. on Friday night. And then, so we had, by this point when we landed, I checked the news, of course, to see what had happened when we'd been in the air, because our flight was like 8 hours. And the media had released the announcement that at midnight, so from the 20th to the 21st, starting on the midnight the 21st, everyone entering the country would go into mandatory quarantine. And then midnight the 22nd, I believe, is when they were shutting the border to foreigners. So there's still like one more day for foreigners to arrive, and those people on Saturday would go directly to quarantine. So we thought, and then there was also the announcement that like the university dorms in Tu Duc had been vacated and were being cleaned and getting prepared for all the recent arrivals. So those are the news updates that we'd missed. And then when we were waiting, it was a little bit, at least, at first it was kind of relaxed. It was just like letting the people do what they needed to do. But then I started to overhear other people's conversations and phone calls. And there was one, older man that said, "They're not letting me in. I have to go back." There was another man that was getting quite flustered and panicked and raising his voice and saying, "I have nowhere to go in Australia. This is where I live. No one to take care of me." And then a couple other Westerners that were in the same boat. Not a lot of progress. They're basically trying to put us all back on the plane to Australia.
Yeah, I mean, so at first we were kind of like relieved to be back in Saigon. Like, right, we've made it. I mean, we could see the customs and the border, so it was so close. But then again, we moved into the next phase of all these eventualities that we thought about. Then they all came into play. Like, what's going to happen? Are they going to send us on a plane back? Then we'll go back to Australia. Then how do we get back? Can we get back to New Zealand at this point? Are they going to send us back to our home countries? Like, I mean, at that point, I was ready to just camp in the airport and be like, I'll just live in the airport until this is all over. Like,
to the Vietnamese people's credit, like the different people that were kind of helping, because there were some people that spoke English that were dealing with us, and I don't think they had any authority. They had like Saigon tourist kind of badges on.
No,
they
weren't Saigon ground services.
Oh, ground services. Yeah, okay. But they weren't like the immigration officials. They weren't like the military. They didn't have a lot of authority. I think they were just helping translate for us and taking our passports and dealing with the relevant authorities. And to their credit, I think that they were kind of assessing each case on an individual basis. At least it seemed that way. But our situation, they told us, you have two options. One, to go, they were like, we're trying to figure out where you can go to get a COVID certificate. So they were like, maybe you can go to Thailand, maybe you can go to Singapore. And we were like, and I just said to the lady, I was like, if you send us to Thailand, we are not getting back in this country. And she kind of like did this like micro nod, like she knew that was the case. Then she was like, well, where are you guys permanent residents of Australia? Can you go back to Australia? And we were like, no, our life is here. Our dog is here. Our apartment is here. Our work is here. We live here. We cannot go anywhere. Oh, and I said to her, if you send us back to Australia, we will be homeless. And
we were like begging by this point. We were like nearly in tears. We were like, we lived here for 4 years. Like, this is our home.
Yeah.
We just want to come back. Like, you know, you can't send us away.
So, and there were other people in the area that were in the same situation as us. They had TRCs or work visas. They lived here. They had nowhere else to go. I'm not sure everyone's exact situation, but what ended up happening was they went away. They talked to someone. And I think ultimately this is my assessment of the situation. One small blip was they came back with a stack of passports that all had new Jetstar boarding passes in them, which was absolutely terrifying because it seemed like they were going to round us up and put us back on the plane to Australia. There was one man there who had flown on Air Nippon, the ANA Japanese airline. He was the only one that wasn't on our Jetstar flight, and he was literally there, like, trying to show him back to his gate. But anyway, my assessment of the situation is that they were waiting until the clock struck midnight to process us on Saturday as a Saturday arrival under the new guidance. Because what they couldn't do, they couldn't admit us into the country on the 20th of March because none of us had a negative COVID certificate. A few of us had medical declarations that said, can't get a COVID certificate, clean bill of health, similar to what Neil and I had gotten in Wellington. There were a couple other people in the same situation, but a lot of people, no one else had that. And I think that they couldn't process us on the Friday because they couldn't bend the rules. But if they waited until the Saturday, we could still go into mandatory quarantine as a Saturday international arrival. That's what I think the situation was, because the people that arrived on Saturday didn't need a COVID certificate. They just were automatically sent into quarantine. So they rounded up all the foreigners pretty much. We kind of waited in the immigration line. And literally, I checked my phone when they let us go through immigration, and it was 12 midnight on the dot. So they didn't process one single person from our plane until Saturday, the 21st of March.
And apparently...
single foreigner from our plane.
Yeah.
All the other Vietnamese people went through as normal.
That's right. And apparently, this is pure speculation, but from the other foreigners that we were with, I think some of those other foreigners we know now, and they are pretty well connected through their jobs or whatnot. And apparently there was some high-level discussions through their connections direct with those immigration people to be like, what are you going to do with these group of foreigners? So I don't know how part of the luck of us getting in was just because we happened to be with this group of well-connected people, or if that was just going to happen regardless because if they waited till midnight. But yeah, so by this point now, midnight on Friday night, turning Saturday morning, we got through immigration, and then we got led to the waiting area. We picked up our bags, and then we had to wait. They provided snacks. I mean, again, the Vietnamese government in general have been praised so highly, I think, in general, and I would continue that. Like, they provided snacks. It was all orderly. They processed us. They basically waited for, I think because we were all on the same flight, they waited for all of us and then processed us all together.
I think it was just that we were all foreigners.
Well, yeah.
Because there
were
was
all
one
on the
other
same
guy
flight.
from the flight that wasn't.
Okay.
He come from
So
Japan or the US.
we all got put onto a bus, and by this point we kind of heard that we were going to the National University dorms, and bus took us there. Of course, in true Vietnam fashion, the bus driver got lost. We had it on the map, and we had to direct the bus driver to tell him how to get to where we're going.
To be fair, the area of the university that we're in, it's like dorms A, and then there's 40 buildings.
No, but before we even got here, he was going down little side streets on this massive bus and getting he had to it was at this point 3 a.m, and of course he's got his window down yelling. I couldn't see who he was yelling to.
There's a little woman who had her stall open.
She had her stall open. And he's yelling at her for directions, and we're trying to show him the phone, take us here. So we managed to get here, and then once we got here, it's a big complex, and there was a bit of confusion over what building. So then you want to go. I mean, I know if you're still... No, we're not going to break. We're going to keep going.
I think we should take a break.
You want to take a break?
Yeah, maybe.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. All right. So we're going to take a break because we've been talking for a long time. It's a very dramatic story. We're emotionally exhausted just telling it. What we'll do, I'll put this up as a single episode, and then we'll do another episode where we kind of explain more about the quarantine and what's happened since we got here. I just want to add, everything's fine. Someone laughed when I said it's not a prison, we just can't leave. So it's fine here, we get fed, we get looked after, we can leave our rooms and we can go for a walk, which we'll do a couple of times a day.
Why are you explaining
But
that?
in general, yeah, I know. But just letting people know, in general, everything's okay, we're fine, we're looked after, we just stay in our room, stay away from people. Right now we're on day 8 of 14, so we're on the downward slope. No, that makes it sound bad, but we're on the, what's the way out? What's the downward slope? I don't know, Adrie's looking at me like I'm crazy. But anyway, so hope you enjoyed this episode. Thank you for listening. Sorry it's been so long since the last season. If I can get the technology to work, I'll hopefully do this will be a special quarantine season or lockdown season, and we'll talk to some other people in Saigon. Maybe that are not necessarily quarantined, but maybe people in lockdown, find out how they are coping. I hope everyone at home's coping well. It's just a crazy situation right now. For me and for Adrie, the thing that I've taken the most from this is just people coming together. The fact that like the outpouring of help and love that we've been given from people from New Zealand offering to stay. We've had messages from people all over the world asking how we're doing. We've had like strangers offer to send us packages and things like that. People checking in on us that we haven't heard from in ages. And then seeing other people looking after other people as well. And that's something that we want to look to how we can give back once we get out of here as well. So I think if everyone just sticks together this time, it's going to be tough. But as I said before, the sun is still shining. We'll be okay in the end. So thank you for listening to a special episode of 7 Million Bikes. Remember, you can, if you're listening, you can follow us on Facebook. You can listen to your podcast anywhere. And if you want to send us a message and say hello, then you can do it on the Facebook page. Just look up 7 Million Bikes. And thank you to Adrie for being a guest on 7 Million Bikes.
You're welcome.
All right, cheers. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you're like me, you may use your laptop at places where you have to use public Wi-Fi. This opens you up to digital snoopers. It's a massive problem. It can be your internet service provider, or you know who, looking at what you do online, or a cyber criminal trying to steal your bank passwords or credit card info, or even a hacker at the next table trying to steal your sensitive data. These days, it is vital that you keep your data safe. NordVPN keeps all of these snoopers away. It makes your internet activity private, protects you from accessing dangerous websites that are phishing for your data, and lets you enjoy your favorite content securely, even while away from home. And it's easy to use, even I could use it. I've actually been using NordVPN for years now here in Vietnam, and I'm excited to be an affiliate partner with them. I've used NordVPN to watch Netflix, BBC, Disney Plus with ease, and I also know that my information and data are safe from prying eyes, whoever they may be. Join now and you'll get 68% off and 3 months free when you go to my link, nordvpn.com/SMB. Just again, for those hard of hearing, nordvpn.com/SMB. The link is also in the show notes. I know nobody checks them out, but go check that out and you can get the link from wherever you're listening to this podcast. As an affiliate partner, it also means that I will get a small commission when you sign up, but at no extra cost to you. So not only will you be getting a great deal through 7 Million Bikes, you get a great VPN and you'll be supporting 7 Million Bikes podcast. Stay safe online and enjoy the shows you love. Any questions, just let me know. You know how to get in touch with me. And thanks for listening to this show. Cheers.